The afternoon sun hung low over Colony Westfield, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. 6-year-old Tommy Blake was supposed to be inside finishing his homework, but his golden retriever puppy had other ideas. The dog bolted toward the tree line, barking excitedly at something only it could see. "Buster, come back!" Tommy shouted, his small legs pumping as he chased after the runaway pup. His mother's voice drifted from the house behind him, calling him in for dinner, but the wind carried her words away. Tommy was focused entirely on catching his dog before it disappeared into the forest. The trees grew thicker here, their branches creating shadows that danced in the fading light. Tommy pushed through the tall grass, following the sound of Buster's excited barking. He was so focused on the ground in front of him that he didn't notice the sky changing above. The air suddenly felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm. Tommy looked up and froze. The clouds were moving wrong, swirling in a tight circle directly overhead. Then the sky simply tore open with a sound like ripping fabric amplified 1,000 times. A black ship descended through the opening, sleek and wrong in ways Tommy's young mind couldn't quite process. It didn't look like the human shuttles he'd seen before. This thing was all sharp angles and glowing red lines, like someone had built a machine out of nightmares. Tommy tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move fast enough. Mechanical claws extended from the ship's underbelly, each one the length of his father's truck. They grabbed him with shocking precision, metal fingers wrapping around his small body but somehow not crushing him. He screamed, but the sound was lost in the roar of the ship's engines. Buster barked frantically below, jumping and snapping at the air as Tommy was lifted higher and higher. The last thing Tommy saw of home was his mother running from the house, her face twisted in horror as she watched her son disappear into the alien vessel. The inside of the ship was cold and smelled like burned metal mixed with something sweet and rotten. Tommy was dumped into a cage made of some kind of transparent material he'd never seen before. The floor hummed beneath him with a vibration that made his teeth ache. He pressed his hands against the walls of his prison, but they were solid despite looking like glass. Around him were other cages, and that's when Tommy's fear turned into pure terror. Inside those cages were creatures he'd only seen in books about alien wildlife. One looked like a bird made of blue crystal, its wings broken and bent at wrong angles. Another resembled a lizard the size of a house cat, but with 6 legs and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Some of the creatures were moving, making sounds of distress. Others lay perfectly still. A shadow fell across Tommy's cage. He looked up to see one of his captors for the first time. The Scarlex stood 7 feet tall on 2 legs, covered in scales that shifted between gray and muddy green. Its eyes were small, black, and showed no emotion that Tommy could recognize. When it opened its mouth, rows of needle-like teeth glistened with saliva. "Quiet, human spawn," the creature said in broken English that sounded like gravel being crushed. "You worth many credits on market. Buyer wants you alive. Better you stay quiet." Tommy's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I want my mom." The Scarlex made a sound that might have been laughter, harsh and grating. "Your mother not here. Nothing here for you except cage. You belong to us now." Hours blended together in the dim lighting of the cargo hold. Tommy tried counting to stay calm like his dad had taught him, but he kept losing track of the numbers. He thought about his family, wondering if they were looking for him. His dad was a shuttle pilot for the colony. Maybe he was already searching the skies. The ship shuddered suddenly, throwing Tommy against the side of his cage. Red lights began flashing throughout the cargo hold, and an alarm wailed with a sound that hurt Tommy's ears. The Scarlex guards ran past his cage toward the front of the ship, shouting in their own language. Through a small window in the hull, Tommy caught a glimpse of what was happening outside. Massive shapes were moving through space around the ship, creatures so large they made the vessel look like a toy. They had wings that seemed to catch starlight and scales that gleamed like polished metal. One of them collided with the ship, and Tommy felt the entire structure groan under the impact. The creatures weren't ships. They were alive. They were dragons, or at least something close enough to the dragons from Tommy's storybooks. But these were real and they were attacking. Another impact, harder this time. The ship tilted violently to one side. Tommy's cage broke free from whatever was holding it to the floor and slid across the cargo hold, slamming into the far wall. The transparent material cracked, spider-webbing from the impact point. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Tommy heard the sound of metal tearing, the screams of the Scarlex crew, and the roar of something massive and angry. The ship was falling now, spinning out of control. Tommy pressed himself into the corner of his damaged cage and squeezed his eyes shut. The impact when it came was like the entire universe hitting a wall. Tommy felt himself thrown forward, then everything went black and silent. His last conscious thought was hoping that wherever he ended up, it wasn't worse than where he'd been. Pain woke Tommy before consciousness fully returned. His left arm throbbed with a dull ache that made him wince. He opened his eyes slowly, expecting to see the inside of his cage or maybe a hospital if he was lucky. Instead, he saw a sky painted in shades of purple and pink that didn't exist back home. Tommy sat up carefully, his head spinning. The remains of the Scarlex ship were scattered around him like broken toys thrown by an angry child. Twisted metal jutted from the ground at odd angles, some pieces still glowing red with heat. Smoke rose in thin columns from various crash sites spread across the landscape. The ground beneath him wasn't dirt or grass. It looked like crystal but softer somehow, giving slightly under his weight like dense foam. Strange trees grew in clusters nearby, their trunks transparent and filled with swirling lights that pulsed in rhythms Tommy could almost feel in his chest. Everything hummed with a low frequency that made his bones vibrate. He stumbled to his feet, cradling his hurt arm against his body. Bodies of the Scarlex raiders lay scattered among the wreckage, their scales now dull and lifeless. Tommy looked away quickly, his stomach churning. He'd never seen death before, not like this. "Mom?" he called out, his voice small and swallowed by the alien wilderness. "Dad? Anyone?" Only the humming of the crystal trees answered him. Tommy took a shaky step toward what looked like a clearing, thinking maybe he could see further from higher ground. His shoes crunched on fragments of the ship's hull. He made it 3 steps before the air around him changed. It felt heavier suddenly, pressing down on him from all sides. The hum in his chest grew stronger, more insistent. Then came the sound of wings. It started as a distant whooshing like wind through a tunnel, but grew rapidly louder. Shadows passed over him, each one large enough to block out the purple sky entirely. Tommy looked up and felt his heart stop. They descended in perfect formation, landing around him with earth-shaking impacts that knocked him to his knees. 6 of them formed a circle with Tommy at the center, each creature positioned exactly the same distance from him, like points on a compass his teacher had once drawn on the board. Tommy had thought they were dragons when he glimpsed them attacking the ship. Up close, he realized that word didn't do them justice. Each one stood as tall as his house back on Colony Westfield. Their scales weren't just black or bronze, they shifted colors in the light, showing hints of deep blue and silver underneath. Wings that looked too large for even their massive bodies folded against their sides with a leathery sound that made Tommy flinch. But it was their eyes that truly terrified him. They glowed from within like melted gold, and they held intelligence. These weren't mindless beasts. They were thinking, analyzing, deciding what to do with the small human who had crashed into their territory. The largest one took a step forward. Its scales were the darkest, nearly pure black, and its snout bore 3 long scars that ran from nose to eye. Each of its claws dug into the crystal ground as it moved, leaving gouges that immediately began to glow with soft blue light. Tommy tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The circle was complete. He was trapped. The scarred dragon lowered its massive head, bringing one golden eye level with Tommy. The creature was so close that Tommy could feel heat radiating from its scales, could smell something like burning cinnamon mixed with ozone. Its breathing created wind that pushed Tommy's hair back from his face. They stared at each other for a long moment. Tommy's entire body shook, his injured arm forgotten in the face of this new terror. The dragon's pupil dilated and contracted, studying him with an intensity that made Tommy feel like he was being read like one of his schoolbooks. "Please," Tommy whispered, the word barely making it past his lips. "Please don't hurt me." The dragon didn't move. Tommy felt tears building behind his eyes. He thought about his mom's face when she called him for dinner. His dad teaching him to identify constellations on clear nights. His puppy Buster, probably still waiting by the tree line for Tommy to come home. The tears spilled over, running hot down his cheeks. "I just want to go home," Tommy sobbed, his voice breaking. "I want my mom. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I ran away. Please, I just want to go home." Something incredible happened then, something that would change the course of galactic history, though Tommy had no way of knowing it. The scarred dragon jerked backward as if struck. Its wings snapped open reflexively, creating a gust that nearly knocked Tommy over. The creature released a sound unlike anything Tommy had heard before, a deep resonating call that started low in its chest and built to a thunderous roar that shook the very air. The other 5 dragons responded immediately, their own calls joining the first. But these weren't aggressive sounds. They carried confusion, distress, and something else Tommy couldn't identify. The dragons shifted their stances, moving with visible agitation, their tails sweeping the ground and their wings flexing. Within minutes, the sky darkened with incoming shapes. More dragons arrived, landing in wider circles around the first 6. 10 became 20. 20 became 30. They came from all directions, drawn by the calls of their companions. Each one landed and immediately focused on Tommy, their glowing eyes fixed on the small crying human at the center of it all. The scarred dragon approached again, moving more slowly this time. Its movements seemed uncertain, hesitant in a way that didn't match its predatory build. When it was close enough, it lowered its head once more, but this time it tilted slightly the way Buster did when Tommy talked to him. Tommy's tears continued falling. He couldn't stop them even though part of his mind screamed that showing weakness to predators was the worst thing he could do. But he was 6 years old, stranded on an alien world, surrounded by creatures that could swallow him whole without effort. Terror and exhaustion overwhelmed every survival instinct he might have had. The scarred dragon made a new sound, softer than its earlier roar. It rumbled deep in its chest and Tommy felt the vibration through the ground. The sound wasn't threatening. If Tommy had to describe it, he would have said it sounded almost concerned. Other dragons were making similar sounds now, a chorus of rumbling that created harmonics in the air. They watched Tommy with what he could only interpret as fascination mixed with something deeper, something that made them move closer despite obvious internal conflict about approaching him. Tommy wiped his eyes with his good hand, trying to see clearly through his tears. The dragons surrounded him in layers now, at least 40 of them, all maintaining their distance but all focused entirely on him. Their golden eyes reflected his small form back at him dozens of times over. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't know that his tears carried chemical signals his species had evolved over millions of years. He didn't know that those signals were triggering responses in the dragon's brains that had been dormant for thousands of generations. He just knew that somehow, impossibly, these massive predators hadn't killed him yet. And in the way that children sometimes understand things adults overthink, Tommy realized something important. They weren't going to hurt him. He didn't know how he knew, but he was certain of it with the same certainty he had about gravity or the sun rising. The scarred dragon rumbled again and Tommy, exhausted beyond measure, did something that would seem insane to any adult witness. He took a step toward it. 3 star systems away, Dr. Rachel Morrison stared at her monitor screen with growing disbelief. The numbers didn't make sense. She ran the scan again, thinking her equipment had malfunctioned. The results came back identical. "Commander Webb, you need to see this," she called across the Military Operations Center. Her voice carried an edge that made several other officers look up from their stations. Commander James Webb crossed the room in 4 long strides. He was a veteran of 20 years in the Colonial Defense Force, and very little surprised him anymore. But when he looked at Rachel's screen, his eyebrows shot up. That can't be right. 52 Drachner signatures in one location? He leaned closer, squinting at the data. They're territorial predators. They don't gather in groups larger than 5 or 6, and even that's rare. "I've triple-checked the scanners," Rachel said, pulling up a visual overlay. "They're converging on that moon like moths to a flame. Whatever's down there, it's got their complete attention." Webb felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The Blake family's missing child report had come through his office yesterday. A 6-year-old boy taken by Scarlex raiders. The last tracked trajectory of that raider ship had been heading toward this very sector. "Get me a full tactical team," Webb said quietly. "And someone find David Blake. Tell him we might have a lead on his son." On the moon's surface, Tommy had crossed an invisible line that separated prey from something else entirely. When he stepped toward the scarred dragon instead of away from it, every massive creature in the assembled group tensed. Their wings rustled with nervous energy. Several released low warning growls, not at Tommy but at each other. The scarred dragon went completely still as Tommy approached. The boy moved slowly, each step careful, his hurt arm still pressed against his chest. When he was close enough to touch the creature's snout, he stopped. His hand trembled as he lifted it, hovering inches from those dark scales. "You're not going to eat me, are you?" Tommy asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The dragon's response was another of those deep rumbling sounds, but this time Tommy felt it differently. It resonated in his chest, warm and somehow reassuring. The creature lowered its head further, closing the gap until Tommy's small hand made contact with its scales. They were warm, much warmer than he expected. The scales felt smooth like river stones, but he could feel the immense power beneath them, muscles that could crush mountains flexing slightly under his touch. The dragon's eye closed halfway, and it released a long breath through its nostrils that smelled like heated metal and spices Tommy couldn't name. A smaller dragon pushed forward from the circle, its scales showing more copper than black, catching the purple light of the alien sky. This one moved with less hesitation than the others, approaching Tommy with what almost looked like eagerness. When it got close, it lowered itself flat to the ground, making itself as small as a 20-foot dragon possibly could. Tommy turned to face this new arrival. The copper-scaled dragon chirped, an oddly bird-like sound coming from something so massive. It nudged something forward with its snout, a fruit-like object that rolled to stop at Tommy's feet. The fruit was star-shaped and glowed faintly with internal light. Tommy's stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten since breakfast back home, which felt like it had happened in another lifetime. He picked up the fruit carefully. It was soft and warm in his hands. He looked at the copper dragon, who chirped again and bobbed its head in what Tommy interpreted as encouragement. "Is this for me?" Tommy asked. The dragon's eyes brightened, the gold becoming almost white for a moment. It chirped twice, rapid fire, and its tail swept back and forth across the crystal ground with obvious excitement. Tommy took a small bite. The taste exploded across his tongue, sweet like mango mixed with honey and something else that tasted like cinnamon. Juice ran down his chin as he took another bite, suddenly ravenous. The copper dragon made a pleased rumbling sound and moved closer, settling its body in a curve around Tommy. The other dragons watched this interaction with visible agitation. Several moved forward as if wanting to be closer, but stopped when the scarred dragon and the copper one both released warning growls. A hierarchy was forming, Tommy realized, though he didn't fully understand it. These two had claimed something and the others were being forced to accept it. As Tommy finished the fruit, the copper dragon gently nuzzled him with its snout, pushing him toward its body. The creature's scales radiated heat like a furnace, and Tommy suddenly realized how cold he'd been. The alien moon's temperature was dropping as its sun set below the horizon. Without thinking about it, Tommy leaned against the dragon's side, feeling warmth seep into his chilled bones. The dragon's eye, as large as Tommy's head, watched him with unmistakable tenderness. It adjusted its position, creating a sheltered space where Tommy could sit protected from the wind that was beginning to pick up. One massive wing extended slightly, forming a canopy over him. Other dragons began moving then, no longer able to contain themselves. They approached in ones and twos, each bringing offerings. One dropped a chunk of crystal that sparkled with rainbow colors. Another brought what looked like a piece of valuable metal, carefully polished. A third brought a length of strange fabric that shimmered like liquid in the fading light. They piled these treasures around Tommy like he was some kind of prince holding court. Each dragon would approach, leave its gift and then retreat a respectful distance, though their eyes never left him. Some made soft sounds, almost cooing, that seemed completely wrong coming from creatures built for hunting and killing. Tommy didn't understand what was happening. He didn't know about pheromones or evolutionary biology or dormant instincts being triggered in alien brains. He just knew that these massive, terrifying creatures were treating him with a gentleness that seemed impossible given their size and power. The scarred dragon, who Tommy was starting to think of as the leader, positioned itself on his other side. Between the two large dragons, Tommy felt safer than he had since being taken from his home. The warmth from their bodies drove away the chill completely. His eyelids grew heavy. "I wish you could take me home," Tommy mumbled, exhaustion finally overwhelming his fear and adrenaline. "My mom and dad must be so worried." The copper dragon made a soft questioning sound, tilting its head. Tommy reached up and patted its snout gently. "Thank you for the food," he said. "And for being nice to me. You're like a big dragon mom." Something in the dragon's expression changed. Its eyes brightened again, and it released a sound that was half purr, half rumble. It shifted its body even closer, practically cocooning Tommy in dragon warmth and protection. Tommy's eyes closed. He fought against sleep, afraid that if he slept he might wake up to find this was all a dream and he was still in that horrible cage. But his body had other ideas. Within minutes, his breathing deepened and evened out. The assembled dragons watched the human child sleep with expressions that would have shocked any xenobiologist in the known galaxy. These were apex predators, creatures that had abandoned the concept of family and child-rearing generations ago in favor of a harsh warrior culture. Yet here they stood, dozens of them, watching over one small human with protective instincts they didn't even know they possessed. The scarred dragon, known to his kind as Vex Thor, looked at the sleeping child and felt something crack open inside his chest. It was painful and wonderful at the same time, like discovering a part of himself he never knew was missing. The ancient text spoke of the time before, when his people raised their young with care and devotion. That time had been abandoned as weakness, bred out through centuries of deliberate cultural change. But apparently, it hadn't been erased completely. It had only been sleeping, waiting for the right trigger to bring it roaring back to life. And that trigger had been one small, terrified human child whose tears carried the chemical key to unlock what his people had tried so hard to forget. As the alien moon's darkness deepened and stars Tommy didn't recognize filled the sky, the dragons settled into guard positions around their unlikely charge. They didn't understand why they felt compelled to protect him. They didn't question the overwhelming need to keep him safe, fed and warm. They just knew with absolute certainty that they would fight anyone and anything that tried to harm this child. Even if it meant fighting their own kind. Even if it meant going against their own war matriarch. The bond had been formed, and it would reshape the galaxy in ways none of them could yet imagine. War matriarch Keshtar stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Crimson Talon, staring at the tactical display with barely contained fury. Her scales, darker than midnight and etched with scars from 100 battles, rippled with tension. Behind her, the bridge crew worked in nervous silence, knowing better than to speak when their leader was in this mood. "Explain this to me again," she said, her voice like grinding stone. Slowly. Her second-in-command, Draxven, straightened his spine and tried to keep his voice steady. "Matriarch, 37 of our warriors have been compromised by a human child. They refused to leave the moon. When ordered to abandon their positions and return to duty, they refused direct commands." Refused? Keshtar turned to face him fully. "Draknar warriors do not refuse orders. They claim they cannot leave the human unprotected," Draxven continued, pulling up biological data on his screen. "Our medical scanners show unusual neural activity in their brains. Specifically the old sectors. The ones we thought were dormant." Keshtar moved closer to examine the data. The scans showed bright clusters of activity in brain regions that hadn't been active in Draknar for thousands of years. Regions associated with what ancient texts called parental bonding, nurturing instincts and protective behavior toward young. "How is this possible?" she demanded. "These pathways were bred out generations ago. We eliminated this weakness from our species." "Apparently not eliminated," Draxven said carefully. "Only suppressed. The human child seems to trigger these dormant instincts. Our scientists believe it's a chemical response, pheromones released by the human that interact with our neural chemistry in unexpected ways." Keshtar's tail lashed against the deck plating, leaving a dent. "Then we eliminate the source. The human dies, the problem resolves itself." Draxven hesitated, and that hesitation made Keshtar narrow her eyes. "Speak," she commanded. 3 assassination teams have already tried, Matriarch. They couldn't do it. When they approached the human with hostile intent, they experienced severe pain in their neural pathways. Their bodies physically refused to harm the child. One warrior described it as feeling like his brain was tearing itself apart when he tried to raise his weapon. Keshtar was silent for a long moment. Then she moved toward the hangar bay door. "Prepare my personal transport. I will handle this myself." Clearly, my warriors have grown soft. On the moon's surface, Tommy woke to find himself covered in a blanket made from the shimmering fabric one of the dragons had brought. The copper-scaled dragon, who Tommy had started calling Zara in his mind because she reminded him of a character from his favorite cartoon, was awake and watching him with those enormous golden eyes. "Good morning," Tommy said, his voice rough from sleep. His arm still hurt, but less than before. He looked down and saw that someone had wrapped it in strips of the same shimmering fabric. It felt cool against his skin and seemed to ease the pain. Zara chirped softly and nudged another piece of fruit toward him. This one was different from yesterday's, more purple than yellow, but it smelled sweet. Tommy ate it gratefully, surprised by how hungry he was. Around them, the other dragons were stirring. The scarred one, Vex Thor, was in deep conversation with several others. Tommy couldn't understand their language, but he could read tension in their body language. Their tails were stiff, their wings partially extended, and they kept looking at the sky like they expected something bad to arrive. More dragons had arrived during the night. Tommy counted at least 50 now, maybe more. Some were watching him with obvious affection, making those soft rumbling sounds whenever he moved. Others hung back, their expressions harder to read, though they made no move to leave. A younger dragon with bright silver markings approached nervously. It carried something in its claws, holding the object as gently as possible. When it got close, it lowered the object to the ground in front of Tommy. It was a piece of technology, maybe from the crashed ship, bent and scorched but still partially functional. A communicator. Tommy picked it up with his good hand. The screen flickered to life, showing static and broken code. But there was a signal indicator, weak but present. His heart jumped. Maybe, just maybe, he could call for help. Before he could try, the sky erupted with incoming ships. These weren't like the crashed Skarlix vessel. These were Draknar warships, massive and angular, bristling with weapons that made Tommy's blood run cold. They descended in formation, blocking out the purple sky. Zara immediately moved to shield Tommy with her body. Vexthor and the other protective dragons formed a tighter circle, their postures shifting from relaxed to combat-ready in seconds. The dragons who had been watching from a distance took to the air, creating an aerial perimeter. The largest ship landed 100 yards away. Its boarding ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, and from within emerged the most terrifying dragon Tommy had yet seen. This one was pure black, without a hint of color in its scales. Scars covered its body like a roadmap of violence. When it moved, the other dragons instinctively gave ground. This was Keshtar, though Tommy didn't know her name yet. He just knew she radiated authority and danger in equal measure. She walked through the protective circle of dragons as if they weren't there, her eyes fixed on Tommy. The other dragons growled warnings but didn't attack. Vexthor positioned himself between Keshtar and Tommy, but the war matriarch simply pushed past him with casual strength. Tommy pressed back against Zara, his heart hammering. This dragon was different from the others. There was no warmth in those golden eyes, no hint of the gentleness the others had shown. This dragon looked at him like he was a problem to be solved. "So," Keshtar said in perfect, unaccented English that shocked Tommy, "you are the human that has broken my warriors." Tommy's voice came out small and shaky. "I didn't mean to break anything. I just want to go home." "Your desires are irrelevant," Keshtar replied coldly. "You have compromised 36 of my best fighters. You have made them weak, filled their heads with ancient foolishness about protection and care. This cannot be tolerated." She took another step closer. Zara released a warning roar that shook the ground, but Keshtar ignored it. "The solution is simple," the war matriarch continued. "You die, the problem ends, my warriors return to normal." Tommy felt tears building again, but he fought them back. He didn't want to cry in front of this dragon. He wanted to be brave like his dad always told him to be. But he was 6 years old and staring at death in the form of a creature that could end him with one swipe of her claws. "Please," he whispered. "I have a mom and dad who miss me. I have a dog named Buster. I didn't ask to be taken. I didn't ask for any of this." Keshtar's eyes narrowed. She raised one massive claw, extending it toward Tommy. Vexthor and Zara both lunged forward, but Keshtar's tail swept them aside with brutal efficiency. Her claw touched Tommy's chest, just over his heart. One push, one flex of her muscles, and it would all be over. Tommy looked up at her, tears finally spilling down his cheeks despite his best efforts. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry for whatever I did to your warriors. I didn't mean to. I was just scared." Keshtar froze. The claw touching Tommy's chest began to tremble, barely perceptible at first, then more noticeably. Her eyes widened as she felt it, the thing her warriors had tried to describe. Pain lanced through her neural pathways when she thought about pushing forward, about ending this small life. But more than pain, she felt something else. Something ancient and powerful, welling up from parts of her brain she'd thought were dead. She looked at Tommy's tear-streaked face, at his trembling body trying so hard to be brave, and felt her carefully constructed worldview begin to crack. "Impossible," she breathed, pulling her claw back as if burned. "This is impossible." Tommy didn't understand what was happening, but he saw the change in the dragon's expression. The cold certainty had been replaced by confusion and something that might have been fear. Keshtar stepped back, her mind racing. If even she, with all her training and mental discipline, couldn't harm this child, then the problem was bigger than she'd imagined. Much bigger. Keshtar stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, her claw still trembling from the attempt she couldn't complete. Around her, the assembled dragons watched in stunned silence. Their war matriarch, the most feared warrior in 3 star systems, had just failed to eliminate a single human child. She looked at Tommy again, really looked at him this time. Not as a problem or a tactical threat, but as what he actually was. A terrified little boy who'd been ripped from his home and dumped into a nightmare. The crack in her worldview widened into a chasm. "You said you have parents?" Keshtar said slowly, her voice losing its harsh edge. "They're searching for you?" Tommy nodded, wiping his eyes with his good hand. "My dad's a shuttle pilot. He's probably looking everywhere. And my mom, she makes the best pancakes and she reads me stories every night before bed. They must be so scared." Something twisted in Keshtar's chest, an emotion she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its name. It took her a moment to identify it: empathy. She thought about her own parents, dead for centuries now, and the vague memories she had of being cared for before the old ways were abandoned. "Draxven," she called out, not taking her eyes off Tommy. Her second-in-command approached cautiously. "Contact the human colonial government. Tell them we have their missing child. Tell them he is unharmed and under our protection." "Protection, matriarch?" Draxven's confusion was obvious. "I thought we were eliminating the threat." Keshtar's tail swept in a gesture of negation. "There is no threat. Only opportunity." She turned to address all the assembled dragons, her voice carrying across the crystal landscape. "This human has shown us something we believed we had lost forever. He has proven that what we thought we bred out of ourselves was merely sleeping. Our ancestors knew the value of bonds, of family, of caring for the young. We called it weakness and tried to destroy it. But perhaps we were wrong." Murmurs rippled through the gathered dragons. Some nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably. Change was never easy, especially change that challenged thousands of years of cultural conditioning. Vexthor stepped forward, his scarred head held high. "The ancient texts speak of a time when we were stronger because of our bonds, not despite them. Perhaps this human is a gift from the old gods, a chance to reclaim what we lost. Or perhaps he is simply a child who needs to go home," Keshtar replied. "But that does not mean we cannot learn from this encounter." 2 days later, a human military vessel entered orbit around the moon. Captain David Blake stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the railing so hard his knuckles had gone white. He'd barely slept since Tommy had been taken, running on nothing but coffee and desperate hope. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," the communications officer announced. "It's the Drachner. They're confirming they have your son." David's heart stopped. "Is he alive? Is he hurt?" "They say he's unharmed, sir. They're requesting you land at specific coordinates." "Alone?" "Absolutely not," Commander Webb said from behind David. "We don't send you down there without backup. The Drachner could be setting a trap." David turned to face him, and Webb saw something in the other man's eyes that made him step back. "That's my son down there. I'm going with or without authorization." Webb studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Take a shuttle. But we'll have every weapon system locked on those coordinates. If anything goes wrong, we come in hot." The shuttle ride down felt like it took years. David's mind played through 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. What if Tommy was traumatized? What if the Drachner had hurt him despite their claims? What if this was all some elaborate psychological warfare tactic? When the shuttle landed, David saw them immediately. Dozens of massive dragons arranged in a semicircle around a small figure. His breath caught. Even from a distance, he recognized Tommy's posture, the way he stood with his weight on his left leg because his right ankle had been weak since he was a toddler. David was out of the shuttle before it fully powered down, running across the crystal ground. The dragons watched him approach but made no threatening moves. One dragon, its scales showing copper highlights, lowered its head as if in greeting. "Tommy?" David shouted. The small figure spun around, and David saw his son's face light up with joy and relief. "Dad." Tommy ran toward him, and David dropped to his knees to catch his son in a crushing embrace. Tommy was crying, David was crying, and neither of them cared who saw it. David ran his hands over Tommy's head, his shoulders, checking for injuries with the frantic energy of a parent who thought they might never see their child again. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you? Your arm, what happened to your arm?" "I'm okay, Dad. I'm okay. They didn't hurt me. They protected me." Tommy pulled back to look at his father's face. "Dad, they're not bad. They're actually really nice once you get to know them." David looked up at the assembled dragons with new eyes. These creatures could have killed his son without effort. Instead, they'd kept him safe, fed, and apparently even treated his injuries. Keshtar approached slowly, giving David time to react. She stopped a respectful distance away and lowered her head in what David recognized as a gesture of greeting among the Drachner. "Your offspring is brave," she said in perfect English. "He has taught us things we thought we had forgotten." David stood, keeping Tommy close against his side. "Thank you. Thank you for keeping him safe. I don't know why you did it, but thank you." "We did it because we could not do otherwise," Keshtar replied. "Your species possesses something unique, Captain Blake. Something that speaks to the deepest, oldest parts of our minds. Your son has shown us that the bonds we abandoned were not weakness but strength." Zara moved forward then, and Tommy reached out to touch her snout one more time. "This is Zara," he told his father. "She took care of me. She's like my dragon mom." David watched in amazement as his 6-year-old son interacted with a creature that should have terrified him. But there was no fear in Tommy's eyes, only affection and trust. What happens now? David asked. Keshtar's eyes gleamed with something that might have been hope. Now we propose something unprecedented. An alliance between your people and mine. You help us rediscover the bonds of family we have lost. In return, we offer our protection, our knowledge, and our strength to humanity's expansion into the stars. 3 months later, Tommy stood with his parents at the signing ceremony of the Human Drachner Compact. Representatives from a dozen human colonies and the entire Drachner High Council gathered in a massive pavilion built specifically for this occasion. News crews from across the galaxy recorded every moment. Dr. Rachel Morrison, now leading the xenobiology research team, presented her findings to the assembled crowd. Human children produce a unique combination of pheromones when distressed, she explained, her presentation showing complex chemical diagrams. These compounds trigger dormant parental instincts in species with specific neural structures, including the Drachner. It's an evolutionary defense mechanism we never knew we had. Tommy sat between his parents, trying not to fidget in his formal clothes. Zara lay beside the stage, having refused to be separated from him for the ceremony. Other human children were already being introduced to Drachner Guardians, carefully supervised meetings that were forming bonds similar to the one Tommy and Zara shared. When it was time for him to speak, Tommy approached the microphone with Zara walking beside him. He'd practiced his speech with his mom for weeks, but standing in front of so many people made his mind go blank. He looked at Zara, who rumbled softly in encouragement. I was really scared when the bad aliens took me, Tommy began, his voice small but clear. And I was scared when I first saw the dragons. But they didn't hurt me. They protected me and fed me and kept me warm. Zara took care of me like she was my mom. He reached up to pat her scaled foreleg. My teacher says that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands beside you when things are scary. The dragons stood beside me. So I think we should stand beside them too. The applause was thunderous. David Blake watched his son with pride that threatened to burst from his chest. His little boy, who'd been through something no child should experience, was now the bridge between two species. Keshtar took the stage next, her massive form somehow graceful despite her size. The human child Tommy taught us that what we called weakness was actually our greatest strength. We abandoned the care of our young because we thought it made us soft. We were wrong. The bonds between parent and child, between protector and protected, these are not weaknesses. They are what give life meaning. She looked down at Tommy, and her fierce expression softened in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew her before. We have much to relearn. But we are willing students and we have excellent teachers. The treaty was signed with ceremony and celebration. Human colonies would receive Drachner protection from pirates and hostile forces. In exchange, human experts in child development, family dynamics, and early education would help the Drachner establish new cultural practices around raising their young. That evening, Tommy sat with Zara on a hillside overlooking the celebration, watching fireworks paint the sky in colors from both human and Drachner traditions. His parents had given him permission to spend one more night with Zara before returning home to Colony Westfield. Will you visit me? Tommy asked, leaning against her warm scales. Zara rumbled affirmatively, projecting images directly into his mind as she'd learned to do. Herself flying through space, landing at his colony, watching him grow. Good, Tommy said sleepily. Because you're my dragon mom, and dragon moms don't just leave. Across the galaxy, in the dark corners where criminals gathered, a new warning spread among slavers and raiders. The message was simple and absolute. Never, under any circumstances, take a human child. The Scarlets had learned this lesson the hard way, and their fate served as a cautionary tale. Because humanity had done something impossible. They'd taken the most feared predator species in known space and turned them into the most devoted protectors. They'd weaponized something more powerful than any gun or bomb. They'd weaponized love. And that made them the most dangerous species in the universe.